Bollinger Bands are another popular trading indicator, commonly used in trading strategies. But I want to know for myself if these strategies are actually profitable. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos that describe how to trade with Bollinger Bands, and they all followed the same basic premise, which is that when price moves to the outside Bollinger Bands, it's likely to then return back to the middle. I looked through some trades, and while I could see it happening sometimes, there's also plenty of examples of the price just continuing to move along the edge of the Bollinger Band. I needed to test the strategy out properly. First, I'm going to set up the indicators that I need for this strategy. So I go up to Indicators and search for Bollinger Bands. Click on it here, and that will add on the Bands indicator. The other one that I'm going to need is RSI, because this is used in the strategy that I'm testing. So that's the Relative Strength Index here. So we click on that, and that adds the second indicator. The strategy that I'm going to be testing is based on the approach outlined in Trading Lab's video. In his strategy, he actually changes a few of these parameters from the default. So the Bollinger Band, if we go into the settings, a default length of 20. But in that strategy, this changes to 30. So I'm going to update that as well. The RSI by default is a 14 period, but in his strategy, he changes that to 13. So to make sure I'm testing the same thing, I'm going to change this to 13 as well. So what are these Bollinger Bands? Well, the one in the middle Bollinger Band, is actually just a simple moving average. And that's what this 30 refers to. It's a 30 period simple moving average. The red and the green lines either side are 2 standard deviations away. So the red one is referred to as the upper band, the blue one is the middle band, and the green one is the lower band. And these are the strategy rules. Firstly, the price needs to close underneath the lower Bollinger Band, which happens on this red candle here. At the same time, the 13 period RSI needs to be below 30, which indicates that it's oversold and is a good buying opportunity, which also happens down here. So that gives me the trade signal. I then open a long trade at the open of the next candle with a take profit set as the middle Bollinger Band. In the Trading Lab video, he doesn't talk about the stop loss. So I'm just going to apply my own stop loss rules, which I typically use as a percentage of the ATR, the average true range. Now let's get into the backtest and start to get some actual results. So I begin as always by importing the modules and the libraries that I'm going to use for this. I set this up on the hourly time frame on the SPY, so I'm trying to trade this on the S&P 500. I've named my system strategy _TL for Trading Lab, starting balance of 10,000, risking 2% per trade. These variables don't matter right now, so we can come back to them later on. This variable is the Bollinger Band range, so for now I've just set it to 30, which matches the strategy rules. The stop type is something else that I'm going to try and test out throughout this backtest. But for now, sticking with the original strategy rules, I'm going with the middle Bollinger Band. A standard deviation of 2, not changing that. The RSI length I've set to 13 to match the strategy. And then the lower level for the RSI of 30. So it needs to be below this to be considered a signal. After that, I have this function that loads in my price data as a CSV file. I then calculate the inputs for the strategy. So this is where my Bollinger Bands are calculated. I have the upper, the middle, and the lower bands all in these data frames. The RSI, and then the ATR, the average true range that I use for my stop loss. If you're not familiar with average true range, let me just add it on as an indicator here. So I've removed RSI to make a little bit of space, and we look for average true range, ATR. So this is what I will use for my stop loss. So we have our take profit up here at the middle Bollinger Band. The stop loss is taken as a multiple of the ATR. So the ATR value is displayed here on the left as I move around. At this point on the signal candle, the ATR is 2.93. So I'm just going to set my stop loss as 2.93 points below my entry price. And within the backtest, I will test out different multiples of the ATR to see which one works the best. But just to start with, we'll keep it simple with 1 times ATR as the stop. So back here in the backtest, the last bit that I want to talk about is the bit that I generate the trade signals. I have 2 entry conditions that need to work together. The first one is C1, where the close price is below the lower Bollinger Band. The second condition is the RSI is below that RSI level of 30, so that gives us the oversold condition. Trade signals are then taken if both of those conditions are met. Then I've got my stop loss, which I just described, is 1 times ATR. And then I have my different take profits depending on which one I'm aiming for. So right now, I'm just going to go for the middle Bollinger Band. Now I can run my test and have a look at the output to see how this performs. And straight out of the box, it actually works pretty well. The strategy, as described in that video, does seem to perform pretty well. Down here, we've got some more details of the metrics. So this gives an annual return of 34%, max drawdown of 17.5, maybe a little bit high relative to that return, a win rate of 36%, and an average risk to reward of 3.29. So it seems like a pretty decent strategy to start with. But now I want to start tweaking those parameters and see what can be improved. The first thing that I want to test is the impact of this parameter. By default, it's set to 20, but in this strategy, it was changed to 30. So I want to test out a whole range of different Bollinger Bands to see what impact that has. Back in my code, this BB range variable is what lets me test them all out. So I'm going to test values from 10 up to 40. And if I rerun all this code, I'm now going to end up with a bunch of different lines that correspond to each of those different periods. The best performing one is the brown line, which actually is the 30 Bollinger Band from that strategy. The default value of 20 is the green line, which sits somewhere around here. So it does okay, but not quite as well as the 30 Bollinger Band. That strategy video is 3 years old now, so it's interesting to see that this 30 period Bollinger Band is still performing better than the others. Next, I want to play around with the RSI period. By default, it's 14, but here it's changed to 13. So I'm going to test out two variants. First, I'm going to compare the 13 and the 14, and then I'm just going to remove the RSI filter altogether and see what impact that has. Going by the equity charts, it looks like there's not a huge difference between 13 and 14 period RSI, although the 13 period does seem to generate more and have a smoother equity curve. Removing the RSI altogether makes the whole thing more choppy. So it looks like the 13 period RSI also works quite well with this strategy. So far so good, the original strategy rules are working well. The one thing that wasn't covered in that video though was stop losses, and I'm just using the multiples of ATR. Right now I'm using a multiple of 1, but I'm going to test a whole range of them. I'll go from 0.5 up to 3. Based on the final balance and the equity curves alone, there's one clear winner, which is the blue line, but it also looks like it suffers quite a lot of drawdown. This blue line corresponds to a 0.5 times ATR strategy. To get a better understanding of it, it's better to have a look at the overall metrics. These are the strategies going from 0.5 ATR stop loss up to 3 times ATR. And although the annual return starts off really high and then seems to drop off a little bit, the drawdown also does the same thing. So a 0.5 ATR stop does give the highest return, but also the highest drawdown, and a very low win rate. It seems like there's a whole bunch of small losses with the occasional big win, shown by this 6.86 risk to reward ratio. So I think actually a happy medium is somewhere in the middle here. This 2 times ATR stop loss seems to perform pretty well. It has a return of 27%, but a very low drawdown of 6%, a win rate of 57%, and a decent risk to reward ratio of almost 2 to 1. So I think going forward, I'm going to use 2 times ATR as the stop loss for the rest of the strategy testing. And this is the equity curve with all the other ones removed. So this is just the 2 times ATR stop loss strategy. So now I've tested different Bollinger Bands, different stop losses. What I want to test next is the take profits. The Trading Labs video set the take profit as the middle Bollinger Band. And that seems to work pretty well. But you notice a lot of the time the price actually continues and it hits the upper Bollinger Band as well. So I'm going to test that variant and compare it to the middle Bollinger Band. Going by the equity curves, there's not a whole lot of difference, and it does actually look like aiming for the upper Bollinger Band generates a higher return in the end. The annual return is higher with upper Bollinger Band, but the drawdown is also higher. And in addition to that, the win rate drops off a bit. But what I do still want to compare it with is a fixed risk to reward ratio take profit. So let's say here we get a signal and we enter on this candle. and say the stop loss is somewhere down here based on the ATR. Well then, rather than aiming for either the middle or the upper Bollinger Band specifically, I'm just going to aim for a fixed risk to reward, say 5-1 or something like that. So I'm just going to test a whole range of those now to see how they compare. And I can do that by setting my stop type in my backtest to a ratio and then adjusting this TP range variable to go from 1 up to 8. It will actually stop before 8, so it will test 1 to 7. And these are going to be my risk to reward ratios. So I rerun the code and here are the results. From the equity curve, it looks like the brown and the purple line come out ahead of the others. The brown line is a 5 times risk to reward and purple is 4 times. So it looks like that's the sweet spot for these. I can actually compare them all side by side with this table. Here you can see that take profits of 4 and 5 do seem to perform pretty well in terms of the annual return. The drawdown does kind of creep up a little bit and the win rate starts to drop off. I think these are both suitable options, but when I compare it with the previous rule of aiming for the middle Bollinger Band as a take profit, even though it doesn't generate as much return, it has a lower drawdown and a higher win rate. Now that I've done some pretty extensive testing on this strategy, I can recap the final trading rules. So a lot of it actually stayed exactly as the original strategy. We start with a Bollinger Band with a length of 30 and an RSI indicator with a length of 13. I then wait for price to close underneath the lower Bollinger Band. But that alone isn't enough to enter the trade. The RSI also needs to be below a value of 30, so it needs to be oversold. Here, for example, we get a signal. This candle closes underneath the lower Bollinger Band. RSI is below 30. So this is the signal candle. That means that we open the trade at the next candle. The take profit is set up here. So it's the middle Bollinger Band during the signal candle. So when the signal candle closes, whatever this value is, that is a take profit. The stop loss is then based on the ATR, which is another indicator. And I found that the best setting was to use 2 times ATR as the stop loss size. That strategy was described in the video 3 years ago. So the fact that it still seems to perform well is a really good sign. It generates profits with a decent drawdown, but I'm sure there's still more improvements that could be made. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments how you would tweak this strategy even further. And if you enjoy these kinds of videos and you want to see more backtests like this, then make sure to hit the like button and subscribe.